the utilities and everything. And then Area Agency on Aging is going to maintain the outside of the buildings, so they look nice and everyone loves to see them as a neighbor, and offer wraparound services and check in with the seniors on a weekly basis to make sure they have everything that they need. I can go quickly through. There's a.
You have a half hour.
Oh, I got plenty of time.
Well, actually, no. Do you have?
I'm not gonna. As long
somewhere
as
along, I got to ask if there's anybody in opposition to this. So,
okay.
Do your initial part, and then I'll do the.
Sure. So there's a 4-part test about whether or not you should allow somebody to be zoned, change the zoning, and I'm just going to go through the 4 things really quickly and how this application addresses those, because this is what you're supposed to be using to determine that. So the 4 considerations are, number 1 is a compatibility of the amendment sought with the use of adjacent land or adjacent zoning and with land use plans in the general area. So Heartland Commerce Park, which is directly across Burgess Street, is currently zoned PCDD, so we are just expanding that zone. This is not a spot zoning that we're just doing it in the middle of a neighborhood. It's expanding the PCDD into these 2 parcels. So it's adjacent to it, which is something that meets that criteria. Number 2 is the impact of on motor vehicle access and traffic flow. Currently, these properties, I don't know the previous house, if it entered off of Burgess Street or off of, I think there was a shed way back in the back that might have been off of Burgess Street.
It sat there empty for so long. I don't. Whatever drive it had, it was grown over.
Okay. Well, currently the buildings are situated to face Norton Street. Their addresses are on Norton Street. This would move it to Burgess Street. So it would be one entrance for these 2 buildings into a small 10-car lot for that. It won't have a lot of traffic. Some of these folks will be aging in place. Probably not a lot of traffic back and forth. So I don't anticipate it being a huge motor vehicle, onslaught. It's also right across from Heartland Commerce Park, which is going to have a lot of traffic in itself, so it'll fit in. It's not that big a deal. The number 3 is, the impact on public health, safety, and general welfare of the residents. As you all know, I've talked about this many times, we have a significant need for housing in our community, but even more than that, we have an aging population in our city. And so, in most of the new housing has not been geared towards seniors. You got a 2-story walk-up or a 3-story walk-up. It's not ideal for seniors. This is the only project so far that is geared towards seniors that is not, other than the Ohio Eastern Star project. And this is, it's also set at an affordable rate. They're thinking, it depends on what the mortgage looks like, but probably around $600, $700 amount, all in, including utilities, at a fixed rate for people on a fixed income. So that would be good for the community to have these places for these folks to move into. It also opens up their houses for other people to buy as starter homes or to move into, which is great. So it kind of alleviates a couple issues. We currently have several seniors that are what I would call overhoused. They have not gone into their 2nd floor for years. It's just not something that they can do anymore. These would be opportunities for them to live in an appropriately housed situation. So that's great. And then we did a survey. A survey was done at Station Break with the seniors there, and 74% of them said that Mount Vernon does not have enough affordable housing for seniors. 88% of them wanted to see more affordable housing for seniors. Most of them want single-story apartments at 93%, and the 1 to 2 bedroom is what they want. And the incomes of the folks that responded, over 60% of the folks were $20,000 or less in income. So affordable fixed-rate housing is exactly what these folks need for this. And 22% of their participants at the Station Break participated in this survey. So it's a pretty good survey for them. All right, that was number 3. And number 4 was the impact on the available public facilities, general expansion plans of the city, and the city's schedule for improvement of capital facilities. So this is great because it's already an infill lot. We're not expanding the city boundary. We're not expanding the city's services. It's not going to cost more for the fire and police to patrol this area or to serve this area because it's already within their network. So I don't see any reason why it should be a negative to the public facilities or city services. So those are the 4. That's the 4 tests. Any questions?
The one thing that jumped off the page at me, and I don't understand, the word commercial. You know, we're talking about housing, talking about people living. Commercial to me sounds like you're selling something. So why is the term commercial put into this zoning?
So it's because, well, currently the zoning code's being tweaked, but PND would be another option, but
Right.
that's for mixed uses of housing, and this is such a small lot, it's not really appropriate. So that's why. But Rob, do you have any?
That was just the name. If you take a look in the list of allowed uses, this is a conditional use. Residential is a conditional use within the district. As part of the proposed zoning rewrite, it's just going to, this as well as P&D will be merged, and it'll just talk about planned districts. So it's just a name, and so the specific use is encompassed within the definitions. So
That term just
Yeah.
jumped off the page at me for some reason.
And technically, I believe that because it's 8 units, it falls into the commercial multifamily code anyway. So it would need, the state code.
the state fire marshal and
Yeah,
the
so
state
they would deem it as commercial anyway. We won't, we don't think of that as, I don't traditionally think of multifamily as commercial, but it does.
Good.
Sir, forgive me if I missed this in the literature, but could you highlight what you mean by fixed rate? When I think about fixed rate, I think that a cost of rent that does not increase. And how would you keep up with maintenance over time if you don't have rent increases?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and Area Agency on Aging is going to make that determination of that, and I don't know what their leases will look like, but that's, so I'm sorry, I can't answer that.
Okay, so I wasn't asking for a dollar amount. What I mean is, when someone moves in, the rent is then fixed until that person moves out.
So-
How does that work?
Yeah, and that's the piece, I understand the question, I just don't have the answer. I'm sorry.
Okay.
They're subsidized.
Yeah, so they will be subsidized with, income tax, with tax breaks and stuff.
Senior tax levy money, that kind of thing. So that they get government support to keep the rents.
Yeah,
Okay.
but as far as what a lease term would look like and how long you're locked in, I don't know that, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
It's a good question.
Good.
So I see that these say that they're for aging in place and have things like grab bars and the doorways are wider. So I'm assuming that these are accessible. The bathrooms look like they are from the floor plans, but is that the assumption that they will be accessible to wheelchair-bound individuals?
Yes, 100% accessible.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. At this time, for the record, is there anyone here in opposition? I don't see anybody in opposition, for the record. Do we need any more information from Mr. Filkins to pass this tonight? All right, we're still in this meeting until 7:15, correct?
We were
Yes,
supposed to buy pizza.
No, I think you're gonna adjourn the meeting if it's over.
it's a public hearing now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Law Director, public hearing, we have to stay open till 7:15? I'm gonna have Mr. Gaki come back up anyway, so it doesn't really matter if we can talk about something else while it's still in public hearing.
it's a public hearing, and we can adjourn it, and if somebody else shows up, you can reopen it.
Move to adjourn it.
We're adjourning that?
We're not going to do anything else during that time, but if somebody else shows up, we can,
Jeff, we do have some more time here. Can you talk to us about this ordinance 2023-27, the CRA? What's happening with that?
Sure.
Do you have it in front of you?
No, but I know what it says.
Okay, you better me.
I looked up, real quick, some apartment data while you were talking. So only 4.7% of rental units in the county are one bedroom and rent for less than $750. So the need for this kind of thing is extreme to find affordable one bedroom rentals.
Wow.
Yeah.
I need to raise my rent.
Average is 826. I was looking at that today. So that legislation that Mike mentioned is an alteration, is an amendment to the CRA legislation that you all passed last year, 2021, I think. If you recall why you passed that, it was to incentivize infill development to buildable lots already in the city, right? And we created that kind of matrix that said if it's a single family house and it's in this neighborhood, you get this particular abatement percentage for this particular term, and those numbers were figured on census block group income data. So the lower the income, the better the abatement is the idea. Okay, so that worked for single family housing. Seen some success in that. I don't have those numbers at my fingertip, but I'm sure Lacey or Rick could provide those to you. Multifamily, rather than doing that kind of locational approach, we went to some multifamily developers and we said, we know you like the city, we like you, but we don't have any market study. There hasn't been any multifamily units built in 2 decades. There's no proof of concept that a multifamily development would work in the city. So help us understand what kind of incentive you would need to be a pioneer in the city to bring your development here. And they did that. They opened their books and they said, look, they kind of ran us through it. Here's our construction costs. Here's the phases. So we have to float this much for this many years, blah, blah, blah. So we came up with a number that would get them to be a pioneer to build their development in the city. Talked to you all, talked to the schools. School said, yeah, that's great. We want to add a little bit to that. So at the end of the day, we did kind of negotiate it out, and we did understand exactly the numbers that these developments, that a development would need to come to the city. It ended up to be about 89% total with the school payment back. Okay, so that's where we're at. We've seen significant multifamily growth. The pioneers showed up. Our plan worked. Now I think it's time to amend that CRA, because what we don't want to do is incentivize development that's going to happen anyway, right? So other developers are seeing what's happening in the Mount Vernon, and they're like, oh yeah, okay, now I can see that building here will work. And so then we don't need to have this kind of blanket incentive to get people to come here because they're already here, and now we're on the radar. Does that make sense? So that's the really long version way of saying what I want to do, what I'm asking you to do is take that blanket multifamily incentive and treat it just like you would in industrial development. So anything in the future is negotiated by you all, by the county, by the schools, and we'll get rid of the pioneer blanket incentive and make everything negotiated from now on. So that could be the rate, the term. Tammy, it could be impact fees, right? If you want to get 80%, here's, we're going to need something for the turn lane or for the park or, whatever it is. So all of those, what you're doing is just kind of opening up the toolkit to negotiate the best financial deal for future multifamily developers. That's it. Nothing else changes.
If you have questions, ask him why he's here.
I'm here all
Ask him why he's at the podium.
Have you worked with the law firm on ensuring that currently approved developments won't run into any trouble down the road? I know we don't want to move the goalposts for them.
Mhm.
So I know they're going to be building over the next 4 years or so.
Right.
So their actual improvements to the land won't hit until after this change. So how do we know that they're locked into their abatement?
And this is what I don't recall off the top of my head. Did that have a date on it? Anything after a certain date?
I don't recall that.
The answer is, we'll figure that out. The intent is that those that have been approved, so that would be the school, Rockford, Highland, Eastern Star. Sam and I were just talking if the AAA 5 development would apply, if they wanted it. Those would still work because they were the pioneers. Anything after them would be negotiated.
I think that's just the one thing we want to make sure is
Yep,
that
yep.
we don't run into trouble a year from now when, you know, Eastern Star goes to apply for their abatement and they're like, oh.
Yep. Yep.
Thank you.
If they're entitled, like up to, if they've been entitled to this point.
Yeah, there's a trigger that.
Tammy, does that help? Don't leave yet.
Okay.
Any other questions for him?
Can I ask about middle school? What's going on there?
No idea.
Other than what we read, he got
Other-
an award or
other
didn't get an
than
award.
what's-
He was
yep.
holding his little prize.
Yeah, I mean that was Tanner's publicity stunt, probably.
Aw.
Yeah.
Tanner Salyer's publicity?
Grant did a great story in Ox Pages about the filing that was done in the recorder's office and what that means. I mean, it's basically a legal accountability measure, really. It doesn't mean anything in terms of progress. It just means if the developer doesn't perform, then it kind of activates the start date for construction liens, is all, as I understand those things. Which is good, because we want to hold people accountable for what they say they're going to do.
If you want more in-depth, Knox Pages did a wonderful article on it.
They did.
All right. Anything else?
We're not meeting, we're not committee meeting anyways.
Okay.
Um,
We're still in, if somebody comes into the public hearing in the next 10 minutes, we'll listen to them. Otherwise, we'll recess.
so we are videoing right now, correct? We're up and running on
We're
the
streaming now, yeah.
video stream. You know me.
We're recording
People can
video
see us.
and we're streaming, yeah.
Going on the film.
So are we figuring out why we're having in and out?
Well, we thought we were, certainly.
Did they come up with a new wiring like we thought?
What's that?
The last time I think you said it was wiring.
We thought it was the network connection. But we started looking into that and could not find any issues with that, so. I don't know, maybe it's a ghost.
Because we're gonna get asked, so just ask.
Yeah, we'll keep after it for whatever reason. It works fine in the mornings for Utilities Commission and all the others, but,
Doesn't want to work.
So why we're
I
chit
probably
chatting,
get it.
Mr. Zick?
What's that?
See why we're chit chatting?
Yeah.
I've been emailing Brian back and forth about a retention pond, Fredericktown Road, and Longitude Drive.
Okay.
You know what I'm talking about? All right. And I've got a call from a Longitude Drive resident about it hasn't been mowed. And they were promised the city was going to mow it 4 times this year. I guess we mowed it some last year.
We
The
never
city
promised
does own,
No.
huh?
We never promised that we would.
No.
I'm just telling you. I'll show you the email.
The city does not own them.
On the auditor site, it says the city owns that chunk.
Nope.
A portion of the fairgrounds.
Let me
Here
look.
it is. And I'm not, by the picture, I don't think it is the whole retention pond, but it's like part of it.
Right.
Huh?
Fairgrounds Road. Longitude, latitude area.
I believe the number is 200 Fairgrounds Road, if I'm not mistaken.
We do own the lot itself. I don't know how far that lot.
It goes into the retention pond just barely, but it's a little bit of sliver.
Yeah,
I can't get a clear understanding of Brian's emails about the answer to it.
So, I can give you a little bit of history over the last 3 years. So we've continued mowing these ponds over the last 3 years, despite the fact that many of them are on private property. This was something that was started pre-2020 when we were involved. And as we work on this private stormwater fund for developments that don't want to be, take care of their own, we have a real problem if we have a history or a precedent of mowing or maintaining private stormwater ponds. So last year we had a few conversations with residents along, what's the one? There's a different pond that's entirely private.
Back,
There's more on Longitude Drive back on the other side.
Yeah.
but there's another one over off of Park Road, I can't remember that.
So we started to explain to them that we would mow it last year, but that we needed to transition to Laurelwood.
Laurelwood's, both of those ponds are private property.
Right. And
Yeah,
that
they're
we need to transition to a point where either the property owners are maintaining their own stormwater ponds or we enter into some kind of arrangement, because we have to be consistent throughout the city, and this.
So
is
if I look at the property owner on this property, according to the auditor's site, I believe the number's 200 Fairgrounds Road, and then us. The email I got from Brian says the pond was built for the subdivision, but the property was not transferred correctly before the owner and the owner's lawyer died.
Mm-hmm.
So where's that leave getting the grass mowed?
Well, that pond is actually owned by someone who's not in the subdivision.
All right.
So, at some point, yeah, I mean, they're going to have to make a decision to do that, to maintain it.
Here's the confusing part. I don't mean to interrupt, but before you go any further, these ponds are on a private property and should be maintained by the subdivision, which is contradictory to what you just said, I think.
No?
How does the subdivision maintain something on somebody else's property?
Well, they're going to have to do it because their houses were built because that pond exists. And if that pond ceases to exist, the Ohio EPA could come in and remove their
Oh, I
ability
know
to
all
live there.
that. So when are we gonna tell the people on Longitude Drive, probably including Mel, that he's gonna have to start paying towards this?
This is a great week to say that.
No, he's watching. Mel just put his fist in, no.
Gonna need some money
So
from
that's
you
the
to buy
question
that.
I got.
Yeah,
You know,
so I spoke with the mayor about this, and we're gonna work with Todd this week on getting a letter out to all the affected property owners, letting them know the situation.
and this would be the
So
whole,
Last year we said this, that's the last year we're doing it, but there was all this previous doings, and now we're not doing that anymore.
this
That
is
was it.
everybody in Longitude Drive then, from the top to the bottom?
I
Yes.
think that's how that, because
Yes,
that's stormwater
that's-
system.
That's the way that the development was permitted.
So the question I got on that is there gonna be a public hearing on this?
I wasn't planning on it, but
I mean, if you go back, it's in their chain of title. So they should, I mean, it's easy for me to say you should read your chain of title and your title insurance because I understand what that is because I was forced to suffer through a class in law school about it. You know, everyone else looks at it and they think it's gobbledygook. But in reality, as far as the law is concerned, they have notice. So whether the city chooses to have a hearing is,
I still question having to take care of somebody else's property.
they're going to have to come to an agreement with them because if that person decides to shut off their access, they're in real trouble, which is what the people over in Yarger Road are finding.
I share the same thing. I think it's not a good idea to spend public funds on private property.
Not to confuse your public funds and my public funds, I'm talking about the person, Mel, would be spending his money to mow a pond that's on 200 Fairgrounds Road's address, when he, by law, can't really walk over to it, because it's private
that-
property.
but there's clearly a prescriptive easement that's been granted because of the way it was all permitted.
I don't, from what I'm hearing, and I kind of like, well, wait till Mel gets back and we'll have Mel work on this a little bit. I don't think this is going to go over that easy.
I don't expect it will either, but, we have to follow the law, and the law is that we don't take care of private property.
So I guess, will you let us know when this letter goes out? Mel at least probably ought to know. That's gonna be ugly.
So how you feeling?
Well, I'm one of the lucky ones that are in the 5% that has
I'm going to call the legislative portion of the June 12th meeting of Mount Sinai Council order. Mr. Hill, please call the roll.
Mr. Mahan.
Here.
Mrs. Woods.
Here.
Mr. Francis.
Here.
Ms. Keener.
Here.
Mr. Hillier.
Here.
Mrs. Seabolt.
Here.
Mr. Severance.
We are in session. Is there a motion to excuse Mr. Simmons?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. He is excused. The invocation this evening will be given by Jerry Scott from the Mount Vernon Police Department. He's a chaplain in the Mount Vernon Police Department, and we appreciate what the chaplains do to help our police department. We appreciate your service. Please rise for the invocation and remain standing for the pledge.
Well, precious Lord, we do come boldly before you, giving thanks for such a beautiful day and the opportunity to have rain fall upon our earth and nourish us. So, Father, tonight, as the council and the mayor go through the work to be done within this city, I'm going to ask that your Holy Spirit just rain down on them, nourish them, support them, but most of all, Father, we just simply ask that you will give them clarity of mind to make the right decisions for all that live in this beautiful city. And we will simply give you the praise in that most beautiful name of Jesus the Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Jerry.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I just noticed that. Council, in your packet are the minutes from the May 22nd meeting. Are there any additions or corrections? If not, I'd ask for a motion for approval.
So move.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. They are approved. Council, in your packets are 5 minutes from committee meetings for your review. And we do have tonight a liquor control licenses. I'll turn that over to Mr. Francis.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a liquor control license for C2, C2X from 524 KD Brothers Inc., DBA Baker's IGA, 524 South Main Street, Mount Vernon, Ohio, to 524 SM Food Mart, LLC, DBA Baker's IGA, 524 South Main Street, Mount Vernon, Ohio.
If anybody has any questions on that or concerns, you can contact the clerk's office here, and they'll put you in contact with the Ohio Liquor Control. I see no proclamations. We had one person asked to speak on matters of city concern, but I don't see Kurt here. Is Kurt?
He's right here.
Oh, he's here. Okay. Kurt, would you want to come up and state your name and address? And you have 4 minutes. If you need an extension, you can appeal to City Council for a second floor.
Okay, so I'm with the Pickleball Association here in Mount Vernon, and,
He's not talking either. Would you talk into the mic, please?
oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, your name and address.
Oh, I'm sorry, my bad. So it's Kurt Hintersheet, 7771 Ramey Road, Centerburg. So we first met with the architects, named MKC, back on March 8th. I submitted a 6-court plan at Riverside because I was under the impression the four Memorial Junior courts would be resurfaced since they were in poor condition, and since this would give us more than enough courts, and that would give us 10, really more than we need. About a month later, I learned Memorial wouldn't likely be resurfaced, probably because Riverside is the current focus, and there wouldn't be enough funds for Memorial anytime soon, as far as I know. So then at the April 17 Zoom meeting with MKC, Brian, Amber, and myself, we were presented with the 6-court sketch, which you see there. And I agreed to it initially because it appeared there was no other way to fit 8 courts there. And now we're after the meeting, because I'm a lot of times don't think of things until after the meeting's over. I sent an email to everyone and asked if the basketball court could be moved to the north side of the park to make room for 2 more pickleball courts. The city didn't respond to my question and proceeded to pay MKC for a 6-court plan despite my concerns. Seems like we could have had a 5-minute meeting and cleared those issues up and before having MKC proceed. If Memorial isn't maintained, we'd be left with only 6 good courts at Riverside, this plan right here. Versus the 8 courts we have now, we have 4 at Riverside, 4 at Memorial. And those on certain days are full. And so if we don't maintain Memorial, which is fine with me, if we get 8 at Riverside, then we only have 6, and now we're going backwards. And then people aren't going to get to play. They're going to have to wait to play. They have to drive to Newark to play or whatever. So I don't, it's not the greatest idea. Let's see here. Cities all over America are increasing courts, and they're not decreasing them because the sport's exploding all across America. The reason why 8 courts at Riverside is a much better long-term idea is because the city would never have to spend a dime resurfacing the 4 junior courts at Memorial. And there's not a strong demand anyway for 5 to 8-year-old junior tennis courts. I contacted New Albany, Upper Arlington, and Dublin. None of those wealthy communities have junior tennis courts, so it's not even a good investment. With 8 courts, we could have a large tournament in Riverside, which would generate significant revenue for ongoing court maintenance, whereas only 6 courts at Riverside would reduce tournament revenue considerably. Consolidating all pickleball funds at one park is also a much more cost-efficient way in the long run. Plus, we don't need 10 courts, 6 at Riverside, 4 at Memorial. 8 at Riverside's plenty. Another reason for 8 courts is in the last few months, I've received several messages from folks wanting to reserve the courts for church groups, leagues, and birthday parties. If you only have 6 courts, then they need 4 for their league or their group function. And that only leaves 2 available for the general public, which is not enough for the general public to play on. Which makes me think, I don't think leagues and group functions should really even be allowed if you only have 6 courts. But 8, they have 8 at Newark, and they allow leagues, and they also have open play with the other 4, which I think is ideal. And the additional revenue I've mentioned from leagues, tournaments, they'll save the taxpayers thousands of dollars over the long term, but that's only possible with 8 courts. After analyzing the current plan for the past 6 weeks, which you have the picture, the basketball court's too large. It's a 50 by 94 court, which is an NBA-sized court. No city puts in NBA-sized courts in their parks. It's either 45 by 65, 50 by 70. Something like that is more appropriate. That's what they did in Westerville. That's what they did in Dublin. So that's less costly than what you're seeing in this drawing. And then also, let's see. There are also multiple shelters at Riverside already for picnics, and so I'm not sure why this picnic area is really needed. It's in between the basketball court and the 6 pickleball courts. That same section could be used for 2 additional courts, which would be used far more than this picnic area would be. And then both courts could also be paid for by reducing the basketball court size and eliminating the picnic area. That could cover those costs. And there's supposedly a plan to increase parking somewhere else at Riverside down the road, but nowhere near the pickleball courts as I understand it. It doesn't seem to make sense to add more courts at Riverside without adding additional parking in close proximity to the courts at the same time you're building these, because the people won't have a place to park. So I think we need between 8 to 18 parking spaces, depending on if you have 6 or 8 courts. So I'm humbly requesting if more funds can be appropriated to correct these errors at Riverside, so we get it right the first time. And those additional funds will be paid back.
Kurt, your 4 minutes are up. Would you like to appeal for another 4 minutes?
I need like 15 seconds.
Okay.
And those additional funds that I propose can be generated from these 8 courts will be paid back 10 times over with the additional revenue generated by those 2 extra courts. And more people will be able to enjoy the fastest growing sport in America. And that's it.
Okay, any questions? You know, pickleball has really picked up in the last few years, and it's obviously not only a big issue here, it's a big issue nationwide.
Yeah, they're building 16 in Albany. It's going to open this month.
Any other questions? Well, thank you for your presentation. Refer that to Amber and the Parks Committee for their consideration. And appreciate you being here. Any other people wanting to speak on matters of city concern? That's the only one I had. Okay, we're now going to move in the legislative portion of the meeting. Council, in your packet, where is the legislative agenda? Are there any additions or corrections? If not, I'll assume it's approved by consensus. And Mr. Hill, I ask that you read these by title and number only this evening. And we have no resolutions for third reading. We have one for second reading. That's resolution number 2023-53. Mr. Hill.
Resolution number 2023-53, a resolution amending the City of Mount Vernon's designated outdoor refreshment area signage and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Hillier.
Mr. President, I'd like to give this a second reading.
Resolution 2023-53 receives its second reading. Now we move to resolutions for first reading. The first one is resolution number 2023-55. Mr. Hill.
Resolution number 2023-55, a resolution authorizing the Safety Service Director to dispose of vehicles in the police department not needed for public use by the City of Mount Vernon and declaring an emergency.
Mrs. Siebel.
Thank you. I would like to suspend the rules requiring 3 separate readings and take resolution number 2023-55 to its third and final reading.
Second.
Been moved and second for the suspension of the rules. Any discussion on the suspension? Mr. Hill.
Mr. Mahan,
Yes.
Mrs. Woods,
Yes.
Mr. Francis,
Yes.
Ms. Keener,
Yes.
Mr. Hillier,
Yes.
Mrs. Siebel,
Yes.
Mr. Severns.
The roll is suspended. Mrs. Sewell.
I would like to move to adopt resolution number 2023-55.
Second.
Been moved and second for the adoption of this resolution. Any discussion? Mrs. Siebel.
Thank you. Well, we have 7 vehicles here that are ranging in age from 1999 to the 2018. Would you like to talk to us about it?
Yeah, I want to thank Lieutenant Tharp of the Mount Vernon Police Department. He's been doing a great job of turning around impound vehicles and putting them out for auction. So all 7 of these vehicles are impound vehicles that...
6 of them are impound vehicles. The 7th is a forfeited vehicle from a driver who's convicted of her 3rd drunk driving offense within the past 10 years. And pursuant to Ohio law, it was forfeited to the Mount Vernon Police Department.
There we go. So the goal is to put these out to auction and see what kind of revenue we can generate.
Any other discussion? Mr. Hill.
Mr. Mahan,
Yes.
Mrs. Woods,
Yes.
Mr. Francis,
Yes.
Ms. Keener,
Yes.
Mr. Hillier,
Yes.
Mrs. Siebel,
Yes.
Mr. Severns.
Resolution is adopted. Next resolution is resolution 2023-56. Mr. Hill.
Resolution number 2023-56, a resolution authorizing the Safety Service Director to advertise for bids and enter into contract for the Buckeye Addition Water Lines Project and declaring an emergency.
Mrs. Woods.
Thank you, sir. I'll give this its first reading, and I'll need a 10-minute committee meeting next meeting.
This resolution receives its first reading. Now we move to resolution number 2023-57. Mr. Hill.
Resolution number 2023-57, a resolution authorizing and directing the Auditor of the City of Mount Vernon to make supplemental appropriations.
Mrs. Siebel.
Thank you. I would like to suspend the rules requiring 3 separate readings and move and take resolution number 2023-57 to its third and final reading.
Second.
Been moved and second for the suspension of the rules. Any discussion on the suspension? Mr. Hill.
Mr. Mahan.
Yes.
Mrs. Woods.
Yes.
Mr. Francis.
Yes.
Ms. Keener.
Yes.
Mr. Hillier.
Yes.
Mrs. Siebel.
Yes.
Mr. Severns.
The roll is suspended. Mrs. Siebel.
Thank you. I move to adopt resolution number 2023-57.
Second.
Been moved and second for the adoption of this resolution. Any discussion? Mrs. Siebel.
Thank you. Mr. Scott, would you like to take us down through these 9 items?
Sure, thank you, Mrs. Seabolt and Council. Again, we're taking in resources not anticipated during the initial part of the 2023 year. So on our number 1 through 4, this is from the Ariel Foundation for our tree watering program for 2023. The Ariel Foundation has again supported individuals willing to go out and water trees for us. Again, in our last meeting, we were talking about partnerships that we have with folks in the communities who are taking on trees. We don't have enough manpower to do all of them, so there's where the partnerships come in with the homeowners. In this particular case, this would be out in the open areas in which we have new plantings as well. $30,801 is the grand total for this grant that has been provided to us from the Ariel Foundation, and we thank them for their support again. Item 5, workforce development for $1,350. Our HR department has garnered resources from public donations for the employees appreciation banners. I think you've seen those on the South Main Street areas. Those are all coming by way of donations, and we'll continue to do that as time moves along. Items 6 and 7 together is for PAC United. We have generous people who are looking forward to uniting our kids with our police department. Marcus Lyons has $1,500 that has been generated and sent in to us. KSAT themselves have supported this program for $5,000 a grant as well. Appreciate the donations for those two organization, Mr. Lyons. Item 8, we have Mayor, do you want to just touch on this one for me just a minute? He's a little closer to this particular individual, and council, listen to what he's going to give you for a message. I think it's quite remarkable.
Thank you, Mr. Scott, and thank you, council, for this. I did share this update with you in writing last week. Paul Acitelli is a gentleman who is served by the Knox Board of DD. Nonetheless, you will recall that he raised money for Food for the Hungry a couple of years ago. And he has raised money that he wanted to see go to persons with disabilities for season pass memberships. And he raised the amount that you see before you, the $2,181.37. And so he came in, got his solicitor's permit, filled out all of the paperwork, and took donations. And lo and behold, this man has again served this community, and just what a wonderful, wonderful gentleman this guy is, and we're just so fortunate to have him in our community. So.
Thank you, Mayor. We'll have these dollars isolated to its own line account, and we'll have Paul and others help us distribute those to those in need for disabilities. Thank you for that comment. I knew it was worthy there. On your number 9 item, in regards to public buildings and lands, if you're all very familiar with Harmony Park out in the Memorial Park, we are now moving into our second phase of Harmony Park, if you will, and that will be our Harmony Park restroom facility that we're getting ready to, it's going to probably not get a finished product until about a year from now, but we're in the works, and it's always in its going. We want to let you know in this piece of legislation, council, of some of the more prominent folks who have been taking resources that they have donated. Of course, you realize that Steve Oster was here a few months ago in regards to Knox DD, and was generous with $22,500 to help support this particular project. We certainly want to recognize them. Sue Webster is another one who is a donor that's coming through for us as well. Knox Foundation, on behalf of Brian Ball and Cyril Mankins, and with other numerous anonymous donors, who are all pulling these dollars together. Right now, we're sitting at $130,500 towards this particular project. And these are all donations, by way. Some of these, the events and things that came about are a heartfelt situation, but certainly we want to make sure that we recognize as many people as we can. There'll be more information as the facility begins to start growing. More so as well, I've talked with some of these folks, asked them if they would be willing to have their names put upon the donation wall, if they will, when we get to that point. And so far, we have not found anybody who is not willing to allow us to do so, except for anonymous donors. and we recognize their thoughts as well. Thank you, Mrs. Sebo.
Thank you. Mr. Scott, how much do they need for that restroom?
We're probably about 70,000 shy of where we're at.
70,000.
But if we don't get there, we're going to, on behalf of the city, of course, like I said, this will be next year before that, we'll find out what that next dollar amount needs to be, and I'd like to see council help support that on behalf of this overall project. Around about 50 to 60,000 might be our number for next year. So,
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Scott.
yes, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Hill?
Mr. Mahan?
Yes.
Mrs. Woods?
Yes.
Mr. Francis?
Yes.
Ms. Keener?
Yes.
Mr. Hillier?
Yes.
Mrs. Seabolt?
Yes.
Mr. Severns?
The resolution is adopted, and that concludes the resolutions for this evening. We now move on to ordinances. The first ordinance is ordinance number 2023-17. Mr. Hill?
Ordinance number 2023-17, an ordinance amending the zoning classification of parcel number 66-05329.000 and parcel number 66-02335.000, also known as 301 and 303 North Norton Street, respectively, from the present zoning of R1 Single Family District to PCDD Planned Commercial Development District and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Hillier?
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to adopt ordinance 2023-17, please.
Second.
Been moved and second for the adoption of this ordinance. Any discussion? Mr. Hillier?
Thank you, Mr. President. Council, we had a rather lengthy, I shouldn't say that, we had a nice presentation from Mr. Filkins, Area Development. We had a lengthy meeting that we didn't need for a public hearing. I can't put any more into this than what he had added. Is there any questions? Thank you.
Mr. Hill?
Mr. Mahan?
Yes.
Mrs. Woods?
Yes.
Mr. Francis?
Yes.
Ms. Keener?
Yes.
Mr. Hillier?
Yes.
Mrs. Seabolt?
Yes.
Mr. Severns?
The ordinance is adopted. Next ordinance for third reading is ordinance number 2023-20. Mr. Hill?
Ordinance number 2023-20, an ordinance establishing compensation for the Assistant Law Directors in the Office of the Law Director and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Francis?
Thank you, Mr. President. Move to adopt ordinance 2023-20.
Second.
Been moved and second for the adoption of this ordinance. Any discussion? Mr. Francis?
Does anybody have any questions? We've had 3 meetings. One was the first reading, but last meeting and this meeting. So if you have anything to say, speak now.
Sir, I should have asked this during the meeting, but we know our Director of Human Resources has posted this position. We know that there have been no applicants. Just for the public record, could you help us understand how broadly the director has posted this? What kind of publications is this posted in, and what number of applicants would we hope or would normally have generated this kind of?
She has posted it on Indeed. She has used a Facebook posting. She has also posted, we have sent it directly to the 7 law schools here in Ohio. We've posted it on the city's website, as well as we have used our own social media channels to amplify that as well.
And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
And you also asked how many. We'd like several people. But we just need at least one. And at this point, given the current salary, we haven't received any.
And it's her opinion, as the Director of Human Resources, that the salary is the prime obstacle to the application.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
And I want to jump in. I'm trying to look, but she typically posts these jobs to the Ohio Municipal League as well. So
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
guessing it
She also did that as well.
went there as well.
And our LinkedIn page. Yes, she also did a LinkedIn page plus she paid to have that boosted on LinkedIn.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
You're fine.
Mr. Scott, were you able to work out, compared to 2022 salary for the law director 1, what this would take percentage increase overall?
No, I do not have that information, that particular information
Okay.
in my
I would just like to say that the median salary for last year for Knox County was $26,000. So even with this raise, both of these positions are less than the median salary for our county. I think that we're relying heavily on lawyers from outside of the county to come here and just love the community so much that they want to live here and work here for less than they could make 20 miles away. And I think that's something to consider.
Other discussion? Mr. Hill?
Mr. Mahan,
Yes.
Mrs. Woods,
No.
Mr. Francis,
No.
Ms. Keener,
Yes.
Mr. Hillier,
No.
Mrs. Seabold,
No.
Mr. Severns.
By a vote of 4-2, this ordinance is defeated. Okay, we now move to ordinances for second reading. First ordinance is ordinance number 2023-21. Mr. Hill.
Ordinance number 2023-21, an ordinance to accept the vacation of a portion of Lewis Street and South Alley in the city of Mount Vernon, Knox County, Ohio, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Hillier.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll give this a second reading and let council know there'll be a public hearing for this ordinance and also the next ordinance on the 26th. Thank you.
This ordinance receives its second reading. Next ordinance is ordinance number 2023-22. Mr. Hill.
Ordinance number 2023-22, an ordinance amending the zoning classification of parcel number 66-00268.000, also known as 600 West Vine Street, from the present zoning of R2 Single and Two Family District to GB General Business, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Hillier.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll give this a second reading. Also, I assume somebody will be contacting the people
That has been done.
to be here for the presentation.
Oh, yes.
Power exchange.
That has been done. They will be here on the 26th, yes.
Thank you.
This ordinance receives its second reading. Now we move to ordinance number 2023-23. Mr. Hill.
Ordinance number 2023-23, an ordinance establishing a zoning fee schedule pursuant to section 1153.14 of the zoning code and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Hillier.
Mr. President, I'd give ordinance 2023-23 a second reading, please.
This ordinance also receives its second reading. Now we move to ordinances for first reading. The first one is ordinance number 2023-24. Mr. Hill.
Ordinance number 2023-24, an ordinance amending the zoning classification of parcel number 70-00366-002 and parcel number 70-0366-003, both also known as 1104 West Gambier Street, from the present zoning of Clinton Township, LB Local Business, to GB General Business. Parcel number 70-00366-004, also known as 120 South Norton Street, from Clinton Township RRA Rural Residential and Agricultural to GB General Business. And parcel number 70-0366-005, also known as 130 South Norton Street, from Clinton Township GB General Business to GB General Business, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Hillier.
Mr. Hill, I hate to do this to you after all that. Give ordinance 2023-24 its first reading, and we'll have a public hearing on this July 10th at 6:45. Thank you.
You want him to read this a couple more times?
That's why I did that.
Okay. Okay, that ordinance receives its first reading. Next ordinance is ordinance number 2023-25. Mr. Hill.
Ordinance number 2023-25, an ordinance to amend section 919.07 of the codified ordinances of the city of Mount Vernon regarding water charges and declaring an emergency.
Mrs. Woods.
I'll give this its first reading, please.
This ordinance receives its first reading. Next ordinance is ordinance number 2023-26. Mr. Hill.
Ordinance number 2023-26, an ordinance authorizing the execution and delivery of a petition to establish the Mount Vernon New Community Authority District under Ohio Revised Code Chapter 349 and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Hillier.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to suspend the rule for 3 separate readings. Take ordinance 2023-26 to its third and final reading, please.
Second.
Been moved and seconded for the suspension of the rules. Any discussion on the suspension? Mr. Hill.
Mr. Mahan.
Yes.
Mrs. Woods.
Yes.
Mr. Francis.
Yes.
Ms. Keener.
Yes.
Mr. Hillier.
Yes.
Mrs. Seabold.
Yes.
Mr. Severns.
The rule is suspended. Mr. Hillier?
Mr. President, I move to adopt ordinance 2023-26, please.
Second?
Been moved and seconded for the adoption of this ordinance. Any discussion? Mr. Hillier?
Thank you. Council, we listened to Mr. Godke earlier. Mr. Ringle's here. Mr. Godke brought him up earlier and said that he was here representing. I'm going to have you introduce yourself, what you have to do with this, and give him a little information. And there was a question somebody had that Mr. Godke couldn't answer. I think, Tammy, that was you?
I don't think so.
No, it was Jay and I.
Okay. It's your floor. Introduce yourself, if you would, please.
Thank you very much, Councilman. Good evening, council members. My name is Mike Ringle. I'm with the law firm Burkhardt Graydon, and we helped to draft this petition that's before the city. Point that I believe was a question that was asked earlier was, as the city expands, would property be automatically included within the new community authority? The petition provides that one city-owned parcel would be the first property within the new community authority, but then any future parcels that would be part of the new community authority would have to petition the board of trustees of the new community authority appointed by city council in order to join the new community authority. Any of the property that would be in the new community authority does not have to be contiguous, so it can be anywhere within the city. It doesn't have to touch, and just because property is being brought into the city does not mean that it is automatically brought into the new community authority. And I'm happy to answer any other questions at this time. I believe we'll be returning before council to give a more detailed presentation, but happy to answer any questions at this point.
Any other question? Any other questions?
Go ahead.
Sir, I appreciate your response to that question. When you do come back, it would be, I think, important for us to understand how the mechanics of that would work. So if a property is annexed in, since the city is the petitioner for this particular, then how would that work mechanically, and would there be incentive for a developer to annex in and then ask to be part of this, when it would basically increase the cost? So we need to understand how that would work, and what's the incentive for new developments annexed in to come under this authority.
I can speak to that now in some part.
That would be great if you opt that off the top of your head.
Absolutely. So the incentive for having new developments that are being annexed into the city join the new community authority is the additional development charge that the new community authority would levy in that new development that would allow the developer to provide for better infrastructure for their development.
Okay.
Often developers have to pay for that infrastructure up front, which can be very costly, and this is a way that you can partner with new developments in order to have the best infrastructure for new developments and then also to support existing infrastructure.
Okay, so that's correct. There is an incentive for a new developer to. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Hill?
Mr. Mahan?
Yes.
Mrs. Woods?
Yes.
Mr. Francis?
Yes.
Ms. Keener?
Yes.
Mr. Hillier?
Yes.
Mrs. Seaval?
Yes.
Mr. Severance?
The ordinance is adopted. Next ordinance is ordinance number 2023-27. Mr. Hill?
Ordinance number 2023-27, an ordinance amending resolution number 2021-39 to change the circumstances under which certain community reinvestment area exemptions are offered in the city of Mount Vernon and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Hillier?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to give ordinance 2023-27 its first reading. Mr. Godke, this is the one you want a 20-minute meeting on the next meeting?
No, that was the new community authority
For the next meeting?
for the next meeting.
All right, I'll take care of that. Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Thank you. This gets the first reading. Thank you.
This ordinance receives its first reading. The final ordinance for this evening is ordinance number 2023-28. Mr. Hill?
Ordinance number 2023-28, an ordinance consenting to the annexation of 4.325 acres from Clinton Township into the city of Mount Vernon, providing for certain city services to the annexed parcel and providing protections against incompatible uses under existing township zoning and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Hillier?
Thank you, Mr. President. Council, I'd like to give ordinance 2023-28 its first reading tonight. I need a 20-minute committee meeting at the next meeting. I'm told Mayor Mavis is going to be here to speak to us on this, and I'll ask for passage at that time as well. That fits the timelines, correct, Rob?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes.
This
It'll,
ordinance-
it's 20 days, and the 20 days is over on Wednesday. So because of the way this came in, we were able to get it so that we could give it a first reading.
And just so
and a
you
second
know,
reading.
they walked this one down, they didn't send it by mail. Thank you.
This ordinance receives its first reading. That concludes the ordinances for this evening. We now move to remarks of administration. Mayor Starr.
Thank you, Mr. President and Council. Just want to let you all know a little bit, I'm sorry, James, if I'm stealing your thunder, but Pack United event is coming up this Wednesday, 14th at 3 o'clock at Hiawatha Park, where they're gonna be playing kickball. So we expect a good crowd, and so if you have some time, hopefully the rain will hold off, but that might not deter anybody from playing anyway. So that program is just growing more and more, and we're very proud of the organizers and the sponsors and everybody who have just sunk their teeth into this. So it's helping to develop the relationships that we hoped that it would. Speaking of the police department, I really want to take the opportunity to congratulate Quade Lewis on his recent certification through the Ohio Public Safety Leadership Academy, an 11-week program, really intense learning. This is the one that Captain McKnight did last year, and why this is so important to us is it didn't really cost us much money at all, and the amount of contacts that Officer Lewis was able to make is going to serve the community very well. And I'm very happy that his capstone project for this was to create a drone policy. So having the size of our city to have a drone policy is really good. And so we're ahead of the curve on that. But it was Safety Service Director and I and the police chief went down to see he and his wife at the event and watch him walk across the stage. So it was quite a special moment. So congratulations to Quade Lewis. If you see him, please mention your appreciation for him as well. The only other thing that I wanted to mention this evening is that our offices will be closed on Monday in celebration of Juneteenth. So with that, Mr. President, that's all.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Zick.
Yes, thank you. I'm sure Council may have seen Knox Pages did some good reporting on this. There are a couple of traffic pattern changes I approved last week. The first being the removal of the signals at Belmont and Mansfield Avenue to prepare for the new intersection there. And then coming this Thursday, we will allow two-way traffic as well as truck traffic on Hamtramck between Sandusky and Mulberry to support the construction that is expected to be going on at the old middle school. Lastly, I do expect a press release to go out this week about signs in the right-of-way. Unfortunately, Mr. Severance couldn't be here. I know this is an interest of him. Coming July 15th, we will be having our staff as well as supervision staff start removing all signs from the right-of-way. That would be the tree lawn area in most properties, but we did want to give time to let our Realtors Association, our nonprofits, obviously any political candidates be aware that signs won't be allowed in that tree lawn area moving forward. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Mr. Scott.
Nothing further, Mr. President.
Mr. Braun.
I have nothing, thank you.
Mr. Mahan.
I want to add my congratulations to Lieutenant Lewis. Mayor already mentioned, and when you hear about a drone program, you know that can sound interesting, exciting, scary, but I was impressed with the research that Lieutenant Lewis has done, and he talked to various stakeholders, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that develops. I had the opportunity also to watch some training today at the police department. Lieutenant Rex Young and Officer Nick Murda have taken it upon themselves to be certified in a Gracie Survival Tactics instructor program, and they were training not only MVPD Day but also Mount Vernon Probation, Fredericktown Police. I believe I saw the Fredericktown Police Chief there, and at least one or two of his officers. And this is, council, this is good training, and it, you know, survival tactics sounds scary, but this kind of self-defense is focused on being as gentle as possible with the subject. So not only is it teaching the officer how to defend themselves, but essentially, when done very, very well, these tactics protect the subject themselves from unnecessary harm, unnecessary violence. And I appreciate the concept of our police officers being peace officers, and you know, not necessarily going to the harsher types of response that they could, or at least learning that there are other options. And I would watch the training, and it is hard work. I mean, those men and women were putting in hard work today, and I appreciate the work of our police department in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Skinner.
I have a couple of things. First, Trailapalooza is happening again this year. That is June 24th from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the CA&C Visitor Center. It's a great opportunity to come out and celebrate our trails and the connection that they bring us. I would like to say, while the newspaper is here, we've experienced a tidal wave, really, of vandalism in our city parks. And I would just like to encourage the public to be hyper aware, and if they see something, to call that in. And just something that the individual who came and spoke about pickleball today, I would like to reiterate that if you would like to make a reservation at a park facility, you should call the park department of the city to make those reservations, because that is who would be able to do that for those courts, not an outside association. And that's all. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mrs. Sebo.
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Mr. Hillier.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just two items real quick. Those of you may know that Vernon View Drive property did sell. That's 0 Vernon View. That's sold to the developer who wanted the R3 zoning, and was turned down by municipal planning. I did note in that meeting that Mr. Bald mentioned to the planning, or in the meeting, that asked the gentleman if he'd be interested in PND. Has there been conversations? Can either one of you tell me, has he been back to the city wanting to do anything else with this? The phone calls are started, that's why I've asked.
Yeah, I haven't seen any permits come through. I can check in with Lacey and see if she's had any discussions with him.
You don't know if there's been any conversation at all?
I've had no calls.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
And then emails. I don't know exactly how to put this. I sent a couple emails wanting some information on Dora, and the President of City Council sent an email to see if they got my emails. And I just asked that sometime when you have administration meetings or whatever, maybe talk about what the policy is about answering emails when council people have questions. Thank you.
Mrs. Woods.
Nothing this evening, thank you.
Mr. Francis.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, council colleagues, I regret to say that at the end of this meeting in administration, I will be resigning my seat as Second Ward Council, due in fact to my work hours. And for 16 months, it's been grueling, and it's not fair to my constituents. It's not fair to you. It's not fair to my family that I do this, and it was just trying to push through to get to the end of this year. And once I realized that that's not what we're supposed to do. So honorably, I'm resigning so that I can maintain my honor to the people. They deserve to have the person that they elected, and for 16 months, regretfully, they have not. I have failed. So it's time for me to leave. It has been an honor to work with each one of you. And it's been a pleasure to serve this city and the people that live in it. And this is the one way that I can keep my integrity for the job that they placed me in. Thank you, Mr. President.
Well, John, we appreciate what you've done for the city for 11.5 years. You've been a great council person, and you're certainly going to be missed. And I would like Mr. Hill to have a 5-minute meeting at the next city council meeting to go into and discussion for the organizational meeting replacement, because Mr. Francis is president pro tem, and we need to elect another president pro tem for the remainder of his term. And also, I don't know how soon the person's going to be replacing Mr. Francis, but he is also on schedule to be on the June and July WMVO. So some of us, if the new person is there, I don't know if John wants to do it one last time or not, but
John, it's with me.
What's the first one?
I have it here.
Am I allowed to do that once the time hits? Because I can still do the radio.
that's on June 22nd. You might want to.
Okay. I can do that. That's
Okay, on June 22nd, I think that would be appropriate for him to be there. And then on July 27th, let's see, July 25th, both of those were with Mr. Hillier.
Oh, thanks, John.
and so maybe the new person will be on board by July 27th, and not maybe one of the rest of us could cover for that. But John, we certainly appreciate that your service. And just so the public is aware, not less than 5, no more than 45 days after the vacancy occurs, the County Central Committee, acting through its members who reside in the city where the vacancy occurs, shall meet for the purpose of making an appointment. Not less than 4 days before the date of the meeting, the chairperson or secretary of the Central Committee shall send by first-class mail to every member of such Central Committee who resides in the city, whereas the vacancy occurs, written notice, which shall state the time and place of such meeting and the purpose thereof. The majority of the members of the Central Committee present at such meeting shall make an appointment. But it's my understanding it should only be from that ward.
Yes, that is correct.
Now, I'm reading this from the revised code, but
Well, I'm not sure which provision of the revised code you're in, but yes, it is.
But that's the time frame.
When-
5 days, 45 days.
Yes.
And I'll give this resignation to the party chair of the Republican Party, and so he can make the appropriate time frame. If people are interested in that, they need to let Tom Collier know. We do have one person running for Mr. Francis's seat, but that doesn't mean that somebody else couldn't be appointed for the term, for the rest of his term. So, but John, we certainly appreciate what you've done for this city.
I love you all.
Yeah, we love you too. You've done a great job. Thank you for the media for being here this evening, Knox Pages, and that being said, I call for adjournment.
So move.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed nay. We are adjourned.